Good afternoon. This is Tim Markle. I'm director of the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs. This is Conversations for Showing Up for Kids, or it's Conversations Aren't Showing Up for Kids. It's my own program and I don't know the name of it. Welcome to my life as a special needs parent and professional. Some days just go that way. We are excited that you have joined us today. We have tried to set aside conversations as a way to have some casual, informal conversations with parents and professionals around topics that interest parents and that are important to parents. Myself, I'm a parent of a 23-year-old who's on the autism spectrum. And so I come to this job not just for a paycheck, because I want to make the world a little bit better for my kid and for all the other kids like him. I am excited today to welcome Molly Naef, which I've never actually asked you, Molly, how you actually pronounce your last name.
That's it.
Did I get it? Molly Naef?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So Molly, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, what hasn't already been covered? My name is Molly Naef. I guess that's it. No, I'm just kidding. So the most important thing about me, and I say it all the time when I do talks like this, I'm an autism mom. I have a beautiful 9-year-old boy on the spectrum, and he constantly teaches me every day. He is the reason for most of the work that I do. I'm also a nurse by background. I was an intensive care unit nurse prior to my son's diagnosis, and his diagnosis really left me to leave the bedside and find administrative roles within healthcare still that allowed me a little bit more work-life balance and some flexibility to stay a nurse, but also to be able to take better care of him. Through my autism journey, was met with some challenges as it related to keeping my son safe. He had a lot of behaviors that put him at an increased risk. And so being the nurse and also science dork that I am, I was doing a lot of research on what does science say could help me keep my kid safer. When I started meeting other parents on the spectrum, I realized that they had the same questions, but they weren't as big of dorks as I was. And so they needed someone to be able to go out and help them find the evidence, critique the evidence, restate the evidence in layman's terms, and help them to keep their kids safe. That led me on a journey to getting my doctorate, to doing a project specifically on home safety for parents, to testing that project with some caseworkers in the state of Wisconsin, and to publishing a guideline that later was gifted to UW, and then creating a private consulting business to go out to families who whose providers might not have the time or the access to this guideline, which is now publicly posted, but sometimes they're hard to find, so that individually I could help make kids safer. Ultimate goal, safe kids. That is my background as it relates to this. That's
pretty well done. I mean, I know there's sometimes where that takes you an hour. So
I'm really well, there's more.
Yeah, no, you're doing great, Molly. You're doing fantastic.
That's just the safety part. I mean, I guess from that, through the process of earning my doctorate, I did meet a lot of people along the way, and I've started being involved in a lot of other projects as well. I do sit on the Echo Autism Board at the Weisman Center. That is a multidisciplinary team of providers and a parent, that's me, that teach and learn from primary care providers for the improvement of diagnosis, screening, treatment of comorbid conditions. And then I work with Tim doing safety content, and I have started to branch out to police departments and do conversations with different police departments on how to approach.
Absolutely. So in your work in researching safety and autism, and delving into what's truth, what's fiction, are there some main ideas that came out that could be like helpful to families where safety is concerned? Some of the main can you succinctly do your life's work in like 3 bullet points? So what are some of the major things that you've learned? Right, exactly.
Well, I learned it wasn't only my kid that was unsafe. It was a lot of kids that were unsafe. So what surprised me as I was going through this is that children on the autism spectrum are 40 times more likely to die from injury than the general population. So what that means is while the general population has a mean age, or, like it's not necessarily average, but very close to average, of 72, people with an autism diagnosis have a mean age of 36. So it wasn't just my kids, it was everybody's. So preventable injury that does not always lead to death, of course, is also more likely in kids on the autism spectrum. So they are 25% more likely than the general population to make repeated visits to the emergency department for preventable risk. And that's national data. We did look then at local data. It was very comparable. We did find that there were 32 visits per year at specifically UW Health for kids with an autism diagnosis compared to the mean of 115 for kids without. It doesn't sound significant because it's less than general population, right? 32 to 115. But that 1 to 3 ratio is very skewed when you consider that the incidence of autism is 1 in 59 kids. So 1 in 59 are being seen 32 times, and the other 58 of 59 are only seen 115 times annually for injuries. And that was really shocking to me, to be honest. The big thing then that we learned from that is we were able to take that info. Oh, you found it. Thank you. My guideline. So we were able to take that information about the increased frequency of kids in the emergency department. And nationally, they had broken it down into what types of injuries. And so we did that locally as well. And wow, it all kind of added up. So the national data is very comparable to the local data, that there were specific trends that you could see in why kids were coming to the emergency department, certain injuries that were occurring. And then when they took a step back to look at more causative or correlative reasons for it, why did that injury occur? We were finding that it was very specific behaviors that are more prevalently seen in kids with autism that were causing those injuries. And so my then next step was to go out and see, is science addressed how to reduce those behaviors? And if we can reduce those behaviors, can we keep kids safer?
Can you give us some examples of those behaviors?
Absolutely. I knew you were going to ask.
I try to earn my money.
The number one and most scary behavior that led to these injuries is elopement, running away, wandering, whatever you'd like to call it. It's any time the child leaves the area that you've designated as safe without getting your permission. So it's 49% of kids on the autism spectrum that run away, and majority of the time, or minority of the time, they're gone long enough to actually elicit a response where they go out and search for them. But that has actually been the causative agent to exposures to cold, exposures to heat, to drowning incidents, to motor vehicle incidents, to wandering out in traffic. And so elopement, by far, in a way, is the scariest behavior for me. If you tell me your kid elopes, I'm going to give you so many oh my God, you need to nip that in the bud. Wrap them in a bubble and keep it. No, but realistically, that's the big scary one for me. Less frequently is pica, the eating of non-food items. It's about 25% of kids on the autism spectrum, which is much higher than the general population. Off the top of my head, though, to be honest, I can't remember. I could probably find it pretty quickly, but much more frequently in kids with mental diseases or disorders and in kids with autism. And so eating of non-food items doesn't always necessarily lead to danger, but depending on the item eaten, it certainly does. So you were seeing things like bowel obstruction, bowel perforation, like little holes poked in the stomach, which leads to massive infections, choking hazards, of course, toxin exposure, depending on the agent that's eaten, and then sometimes erosion of the esophagus, the item that may be poisonous on the way down. Certainly items that would cause you to be ill, you could vomit up and then aspirate. So pica is dangerous too. It occurs less frequently, but it's certainly something that's very dangerous. The inherent impulsivity and unawareness of dangers and behaviors can put kids at an increased risk. We can't reduce impulsivity, but those are the types of times where general home safety things are very important. But kids grow up and they learn how to manipulate child safety locks and other things. And so it was about understanding how to grow with that and understand how to keep kids safe once they know how to push in and turn the knob. And then finally, repetitive or self-injurious behaviors. And I put them together because really the science and literature, when you look at reducing those, is the same interventions. But self-injurious behavior is those injuries intended to cause harm to oneself, pulling one's own hair, biting oneself, hitting oneself. It causes harm. Again, I said intended, but realistically, the child may not want to hurt themselves. The stimulus, their interpretation of the feeling may not be of pain or hurt, but it's something that they're doing to maybe soothe, or there might be another reason, but it does cause some injury. So it's self-injurious. And then repetitive behaviors, which can be benign. Hand flapping isn't necessarily of concern, but when we're talking about behaviors that could hurt you, the repetitive injuries, my son had a lip licking until his lips open and he would get little infections. It's an injury, right? So sometimes repetitive behaviors can cause that.
So what strikes me is that what you're describing are things that, you know, us as parents, we're gonna see in our kids. These behaviors are behaviors that we're going to see, and that then we can begin to expect these behaviors. Some of them may surprise us, but we can, you know, absolutely, they refuse to be consistent, just like all the rest of us humans are. You know, we are very consistent in being inconsistent. And so are there ways that we can start to plan for? I mean, it also strikes me that a lot of the injuries that you're talking about are the results of accidents. It's not the intention. It's the elopement that then leads to something bad happening, something tragic happening. Right. So how can parents, you know, look at this behavior that their child's having? They can see that it's going to be dangerous. They want their kid to get to that 72 and not just to that 36 years old. Right. What can parents do? Can they plan for this?
Oh gosh, yes. They make these crystal balls that you can see into the future. I'm not entirely sure where to get them. Probably Amazon. They've got literally everything. No, I mean, yes and no. You can plan. You can be aware. I think one of the most important things you do is just get to know your child as much as humanly possible. It's really challenging sometimes when you talk about, you know, approximately 25% of people with autism are nonverbal or minimally verbal to the point of not being able to communicate, right? And my son's one of them. So, you know, I can't always understand why he's doing it. Guy would shout at him like, why would you eat that? Why? This doesn't even taste good. But that would get me nowhere. So I'm not going to do that. But so you really have to look at understanding what's occurring right before the behavior, and then that behavior, and then is there a consequence naturally that is occurring because that behavior that would teach them not to do it, or do you have to apply some type of consequence to teach them not to do it? So, you know, if your kid sees the outlet and is like, oh, I'm curious about that, maybe they say it out loud so you totally understand their intent, or maybe they don't. Stick their finger in there while it's wet and then they get shocked. That's a natural consequence. They may never do it again because that was enough for them to say that they're not going to do it again. But other times, say your child isn't able to tell you, or they are, they see a hot stove and they want to touch it. They do, and they don't associate that feeling with pain. And so they don't learn because there is no natural consequence for them. And so they go back to it, and they go back to it, and they go back to it. Those are the types of things that you want to look for. Is your child alerting you to what you would consider a painful thing? My son, we found like this big pool of blood in our house. Oh my gosh, it was like out of a horror movie. And we're like, what is this big pool of blood? And we then found a trail and it led to my son, and I looked at the bottom of his foot and there's a big gaping hole in the bottom of his foot. By then I had stopped bleeding. I have no idea when it occurred, made no noise, no one whatsoever. But that knowledge, that awareness that my son doesn't express pain to me in the way that I would expect him to yell out or call out, was very important information for me to have, right? Looking at elopement, it's not always the fact that they run away. There's things that lead up to that you just need to be very aware of your kid. Do they run away from certain noises? Do they hide from certain things? Do they seek that isolation? That might be a sign that that's a precursor to them running away entirely. Maybe they're seeking solace in their room for the beginning, but if they're out and about, their room's not available. They may elope. And so just having that awareness of things can escalate, things can get worse. I need to stay on top of this. I need to look for signs of other things to do. But certainly once your child does have those behaviors, there are things that families can do to keep their kids safer. And that was the whole point of, trying to find out what science has said keeps us safer. There's these really great toolkits online that are not individualized to your child and that give a lot of blanket recommendations for keeping kids safe. But I'm truly a firm believer that as we're all individuals, we should have individual approaches to that. I don't have the same diet as a lot of people in my house even, because it's individualized to me. It's what I like. It's what works for me. It's what makes me happy and gives me energy to get through the day, right? So why do we have cookie cutter approaches for safety if our kids don't have all the behaviors or don't respond the same way? So that was the goal of writing a guideline and of opening up a company to go in and hear and listen and assess kids for not only the behaviors they currently have, what's making you worried, but some of those precursor behaviors. I use an aberrant behavior checklist to look through for some of those concerning behaviors, and some of those behaviors are already causing safety. And then I do assess the home with a caseworker home environment scale that looks specifically at sharps and standing water and heat and guns out and medications, but it also looks at are there small rips and tears in couches in a kid with pica? Is there carpet peeling up in a kid with pica? Is there sharp edges to in a kid that likes to cut themselves? So it looks at other things, not necessarily the most obvious. And then I sit down with the parents and I offer recommendations, but also talk to them about some of these things are intrusive in your life and in your environment. Would I like to not have to use a child safety lock to go open a specific door every time I need to open it? Yeah, it's annoying. And would I like for there not to be alarms on every door of my house that ring to my phone and my watch just in case? Yeah, sometimes that would be really obnoxious, but I turn it off when I don't need it. So I do have that conversation with people that, there's science says this keeps your kids safe. I, as a parent, know it's annoying. What are we willing to do to keep your kids safe? What do you think is most important that you can handle, you can manage, that isn't going to cause huge disruption to your life? And then because people are bad at remembering things, or at least I am, I write it out for them. Here's what we talked about. Here's the things that that science said would keep you safe, that we kind of agreed would be okay. And then usually I try to escalate things too, like here's kind of a quick, easy fix, but if that doesn't work, here's a slightly higher fix too.
So we're at the point where I really want to see if there's anybody who has questions that are out there. So y'all be thinking about questions that you might want to unmute and ask Molly, or you can put them into the chat and I'll repeat them to her. But I'm also wondering, Molly, if you could just, if you have any contact information that you might be able to throw into the chat, if people are interested in following up after this with your consultant business, or they want a signed copy of your guidelines. Just, that would just be really helpful. So we do have, a message. The family has a teen who's not able to use wearable GPS tracking devices. They've tried Geobit and the Dane County track system. He removes or damages the devices. He's eloped in the past, thankfully heads to known locations, but it's still scary. There's a police plan in place, They're using door locks, alarms, visual cues. Is there, I mean, from the outside, non-safety expert looking in, I'm like, oh my goodness, you guys are doing everything that you can. I just, wow, this is such a hard one. But do you have any other, additional tips?
I would want to know a little bit more about those. I talked about it, but I didn't define it. But the behavior is running away, right? The antecedent, or what occurs right before the behavior, and then again, that natural consequence, or if there is a consequence after the behavior. Is it predictable where the child runs away from? It's predictable where they run to, most likely, or it was mentioned. Is it predictable when they run away, or are they running from a specific thing, or are they running to a specific thing? Are all things that would give a little bit more information.
So trying to track down, is there some sort of commonality or some reason? What is the behavior trying to solve? Is it a response to something? Is it a goal? So what's the purpose of that behavior?
Right. And the challenge is, elopement is oftentimes multiple motivators. There's multiple reasons why kids run away. So sometimes it's to run to something, sometimes it's to run away from something. And sometimes if they're not able to tell you, you really have no idea. So if you're able to identify the motivator, that's really very helpful. The use of trackers, the use of alarms, the use of additional locks to try to slow them down. Those are all methods to alarm you to a child leaving, but they're not necessarily going to reduce that behavior in the child. So a couple of things that I like to do that look to reduce the behavior of the child is to do some type of social skills training. That can be social stories to talk about the dangers of going out, to talk about, making your parents aware of trying to leave, that type of thing, so that they know where you are and why that's important. Video modeling can be very helpful. Starting off with the social stories, maybe step by step. Before I leave, I tell my mom, I let her know where I'm going. I give her contact information, that type of thing. If I go somewhere else, I come back and tell her again. But then, over time, you can have the child actually star in those videos and, hey, mom, I'm going here. I'm going to be gone for 15 minutes. If my friends aren't there, I'm coming back to tell you. And then they can see, oh yeah, that is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so video modeling about what you want to see is very helpful. Visual aids, I usually like to do as well. This is a visual cue to the child that they're not supposed to be going somewhere. I used in my house for the longest time, but it's just some type of reminder that tells the kid, I haven't told mom and dad where I'm going yet, so I'm not supposed to go. Sometimes it can be specific borders to, if you're allowing them to play outside without you present, is there a specific area that is comfortable for you? And can you denote that with little flags, with cones, with some way of saying, you're allowed to go to this space, and after that is when mom and dad have to come. So those are visual barriers to the child. Response blocking is a physical barrier that doesn't allow a child to leave a location. That's a fence, a very child-proof block that they're not able to manipulate themselves, gates, those types of things are blocking agents that child is physically not able to go. Again, sometimes blocking does reduce the behavior out of pure annoyance that they can't get out, but it really isn't necessarily always going to reduce the behavior, but it is that safety mechanism that stops them from being able to go past. So, and then you already mentioned the police plan, which I think is fantastic. That is another one of those. It's not going to stop the behavior. It's not going to alarm you to the behavior. It's not going to let you know, but it's going to have people who are knowledgeable about your child, aware of the situation, help elicit a response. And so I think those are all really important things to consider. The other thing is, if the location that they go to is near water, I do recommend specific swim classes that look at specifically, trying to think of the name for it. There's a specific drowning behaviors that they look for. It is water competency is what they call it, water competency classes. And then the third thing I think about is that GeoBit, I'm trying to think of all the different wearable ways for GeoBit. But I'd like to know a little bit more information about how he is destroying that, the trackables. Because I know that the Dane County trackable, if I remember correctly, that's a wrist or ankle bracelet or wrist bracelet. I'm not entirely sure how that one manipulates off. The GeoBit I've not personally worn, but I know that some people wear it as a watch and some people wear it as a tag. Is there a form of some type of tracker that he would wear? Mine is a magnetic pin closure that goes directly onto a layer of clothing for my son. And he has not yet been able to take that off. We've been using it for about 3 years.
We also have, so they may be able to give you some more information in the chat. Also wondering, there's somebody wondering if there's a program that provides video modeling for parents to use with their kids who are at risk of elopement. They are aware of Gemini. Are you aware of any other video modeling places out there? As I mean, I know that it's one of the recommendations, and sometimes it sounds nice and simple, you know, right?
Yeah.
It's like walk through the steps with your kid, or if you have another kid, show them doing it. You know, model, you know, show them what you want to do first, record them doing the model behavior so they see themselves doing the right thing. Sounds simple because a lot of us have iPhones, which supposedly we can make Hollywood quality movies on. But for some of us, that just, it's not where we're capable of. Do you know of anything that's out there? I've been searching online as well. And
have you? Oh, thank you.
I have not come up with anything that I want to share yet. There's nothing that makes me go, ooh, this would be helpful.
Look at this one.
Yeah. Dr. Google is not helping me.
Oh, interesting. I've never used that before. So to be honest, I do not know. The scientific content on it is really in relation to testing homemade videos that Tim just mentioned. So science tells me that homemade videos are the most beneficial. I do not know if social stories in a video content that are made by outside manufacturers are necessarily science-based. That being said, one would infer that they are because it's still video modeling. I think the premise there with video modeling as it relates to elopement was that it was somebody the child knew and was comfortable with providing that information. And so then that was why the recommendation of getting your child to star in it themselves. The literature on it too actually specifically states it's super easy to make videos with your own phone and then you can edit them. So again, that's not how the scientific study actually said it, but essentially that was the whole point of it, was that video modeling is something that amateurs can do with their own videos, with their own iPhones, with their own iPads, and then have that for reference later. So the idea there was that, you know, with the use of no technology that you have to pay for, could you make this at home too, which was the benefit for it. So I have not ever gone out and attempted to find a company that does it, to be honest. We've always just done our own. But then again, I'm also one of those people that makes their own social stories. I've never gone out. I've heard that there's companies that make them and then do them, and then, but we've always just made our own, unless somebody's made them for us. But so I'm sorry, I'm not helpful.
Yeah. So no, what I pulled up in, like, you know, the 5 minutes that I've been looking is, well, number one, a lot of people eloping for marriage, which was not what I was looking for at all. But then there seems to be people have been interested in writing scholarly articles about video modeling and elopement. Yep. And so there's a lot of, you know, again, the research base is building. But I'm not finding anything specifically that you can, you know, drop a drag in them. And a lot of that, I think, does go back to the fact that you talked about how individual each of our kids are. And so sometimes our kids have trouble with, if they're not taught to connect from a specific incident to a global setting, some of the times the brain neurology doesn't get that. You know, some of us are used to that globalization and we think it's natural. And for some of our kiddos, it's not. it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so even if there was, there's still that issue of what is it specifically that this child needs to learn.
Yeah, I have to go. I'm going to grab the Word document of the guideline, because I did do Appendix B of the guideline is a step-by-step instruction for how to make your own video model. And so let me find the Word document, because I'm not able to copy and paste from the PDF that I have up. So give me 2 seconds.
Like me to copy and paste it into the chat?
I was going to do just the appendix, if that.
Yeah, Appendix B.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you have that? Do you have the
put it
Word
in-
version?
I put it in there.
Oh, good. And then Appendix C is actually choosing a
GPS
GPS tracker.
I don't know if I can get the fancy pictures.
The links and stuff like that. Yeah. And that shows just a
Right.
couple different options with clips, magnetic pins, vests, belts. You know what? Angel Sense just emailed me this morning that they're getting a new smaller tracker with more wearable options as well too. So companies are getting to the point where they're a lot smarter about realizing that some of our kids don't want to wear big, massive things dangling off their bodies all the time. Which is funny, because then there's adults, and I got the Apple Watch, and then I got tracks my calories intake, and it's huge. And I'm like, oh, really? More things that will monitor parts of my body that I can't on my own? Give it to me. I'll wear it forever.
I have tried to put in as much of what I'm allowed to copy from the document I have open. And I will, what I will do is I will make sure that I post the link to the full document and just sort of say, you know, check out Appendix B for this, Appendix C for that, when I post the resource sheet.
Perfect. You know, to be honest, as I was doing this research, one of the most challenging things was taking out stuff that wasn't feasible for every family. You know, there's a lot of interesting, cool technology out there. And I found this amazingly cool study actually here at UW-Madison, the engineering department. They developed a GPS tracker hat that had a solar panel on it that recharged itself so it would never die.
Oh my gosh.
It had a chest strap that would do heart rate and breathing, so it would identify if you were distressed, and it had temperature monitoring, so it would identify if you were exposed to the elements. This thing was massively cool. I don't know any autistic kid that was going to wear a hat and a chest strap and all these other things, but it would never die. Like, you could take it camping. It was amazing. However, you're also never going to be able to find this thing, because it was a great scientific study on an amazing piece of technology that we can't buy or purchase. And, you know, there's a lot of really cool things on virtual reality or information specific about pets reducing stress, which can reduce behaviors. But it's not like everybody's going to be able to just go out and get a dog or a cat, you know, got allergies and things like that. So, and
no guarantee it's going to work. And then you have this pet.
Right. Which we lucked out. Ours reduced stress to the NT3. In fact, they identify when my son is upset, and then they like go to him and like and allow him to calm himself by slapping them. I don't understand why they do it. They're also huge. They don't even feel it. Let's see here.
Looking, because now I'm like interested. I want to find something for this family. I'm not finding what I want to find for them.
Yeah, I can do some additional searches on specific companies. You know, the other people that might be really beneficial to ask is some of the Dane County social workers. I bet they have gone out and bought apps or
for video modeling
and stuff too.
That's true. Yeah. So if you have a case manager, put them onto the case as well, saying we think, you know, the outcome, the goal that we have is to reduce elopement. It is a safety goal because elopement is dangerous, and we believe that video modeling may help reduce elopement. And so, case manager, could you please find some video modeling software for us or something on elopement? And help to, get the case manager to help out on your side as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are approaching the end of the normal time. Thank you guys so much, by the way, for asking questions. That is so much more fun. It wouldn't just be, fun. I mean, Molly, it's fun talking, but
yeah, super fun.
Yeah.
That's only me.
Thank you guys for showing up and asking questions. Sorry that we don't have perfect answers for everything, but as parents and people, champions working with families, that seems to be the case more often than not.
I wish it wasn't though. There's times, there's times when I go in and talk to families and it's sweet because they like the behavior isn't a safety behavior, but they're like, while I have you here, can we talk about this other behavior? And I'm like, to be honest, all I really know is about safety. Like I don't know about other, that's what you need to talk to your therapy providers about, but safety, I know.
So my screen is glitching out, just so you know.
Oh
My
no!
Zoom is glitching out. So I've lost my own picture, but apparently I still have audio. So what I'm going to do is do you know of any resources for kids who have a hard time going for long car rides? Have you come across that?
I once got asked about car rides as it related to safety, but not necessarily. So the car ride related to safety, the challenge the mom was having was that the child would get anxious during car rides and would repeatedly throw things into the front seat, but when not given specific toys would tantrum to the point of distracting the mother. And so we worked together to develop a net that would bounce items back to the child. So if she threw them, she would still get them back. And so she wouldn't tantrum and she wouldn't hit her mom in the head. Her mom actually hit a couple mailboxes getting hit in the head. As far as long car rides, I don't know because it's not really a safety thing, but what I would do in that situation is look at, again, the motivation behind that would be specifically related to, what soothes and calms them and what of that is portable. And, you might have to get a little bit creative if the soothing or calming item isn't something that you can portably bring in the car. Safety around self-harm. Self-harm, you have IE cutting, but a lot of self-harm stuff does require like a bit of a deeper dive. And then it is, again, looking at that antecedent, that behavior, and that consequence. Consequence, I should state, is not always a negative. It's not always that they experience the consequence and they choose not to do it. Sometimes they experience a consequence and it is beneficial to in their head. It's something that they want again. So one of the things I look at with self-harm behaviors, I'm not sure if it is specifically cutting that you're looking at, but I do talk to the child if they're able to talk to me, or talk to the parent about what's occurring directly before the self-harming behavior, and then what's happening after the self-harming behavior. Sometimes the self-harming behavior is done because the experience of what you and I would consider pain is not interpreted as pain by the child and is in fact consequence that elicits the behavior more frequently. And so I would just need, for those, I like a lot more information about self-harm behaviors. And just realistically knowing that right before information and then the behavior. Is it increased frequency with exposure to specific stressors? Is it decreased with other times? Historically, the self-injurious behaviors that I have experienced for specifically for kids with autism, it has been what we call competing stimulus that's been the most beneficial. Competing stimulus is where you offer a similar experience to the behavior that's causing the injury in a method of reducing that behavior. As it relates to the release of stress, specifically if that is what the child is telling you, we look at exploring and increasing therapies that are driven towards self-regulation of emotions and self-regulation of stress and how to manage and cope with stress. For those, I do usually recommend, if you don't already have a mental health provider on your case, that they work with you specifically on stress reduction. Then I also talk to OT if they're already on your case about ways to self-regulate. So again, if the cause of the self-harm behavior, stress, those are the two things I look to, is understanding, identifying and understanding. But it sounds like if they're saying it's for release of stress, they've already identified. So they just need to look at safe and comfortable ways for release of that stress. It's a little bit slower of a long-term process, but from a parenting perspective of that you can do in the home, unfortunately, a lot of that is environmental control. That's that physical blocking, removing of the unsafe items that are used for cutting or stress. If they're hoarding that item, it is potentially removing access to being able to close or lock off that. I do talk about positive consequences, reward charts, finding something that is a motivator for the child to, at the end of the day, if they don't exhibit the self-harm behavior, they earn a mark or a sticker or other thing on a reward chart. At the end of the week, they earn a reward. Oftentimes, depending on the age of the child, and it's a preteen, having them keep and maintain journals to talk about their stress or behavior through the day and how they were feeling, and to reward or praise those times when they felt the stress but did not engage in the self-injurious or self-harmful behavior. Those are a couple of the different behaviors that we look for, and that's a little bit more mindfulness of the behavior on the child. And again, only helpful for that older child that's able to identify and reduce that stress, but then environmental controls, blocking, and then the work with professionals for that behavior. Trying to remember if there's any others. I'm not used to doing these on the fly, Tim. I'm used to having no, I think those are the big ones. Positive reinforcement, blocking, environmental management. I hope that was helpful. To be honest, I don't know if competing stimulus would work for cutting if it's a release of stress, but it's something to think about. Competing stimulus is probably one of my favorite interventions because it allows you to be really creative. The idea behind competing stimulus is if the act itself brings a sensory reward, a sensory positive consequence, that you try to replace a behavior that can cause an injury with a behavior that cannot cause an injury. And so I don't know if it would be helpful to cut items that feel like skin. And I'm trying to think of any item, like Play-Doh is a little bit too soft. In medical school and in nursing school, we practice on fruit. You know, when stressed could the child be, but I think cutting is too extreme of a behavior to, I'm not entirely sure that that would be the most beneficial. I think cutting, especially in a heightened stress environment, I don't think competing stimulus would be strong enough. Then again, it doesn't hurt to try it, unless you don't have any vegetables or fruits to cut out. Tim, it's so weird to not see you. Or we lost you. I think we may have lost Tim. For those that are still on, if you can hear me, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you all. And if you have any other questions, my contact information is in the chat, naefmolly@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody. I hope so. It was very fast, though, too.